Good afternoon, everyone. I am Councilmember Andrew Johnson, Chair of the Intergovernmental Relations Committee, and I'm going to go ahead and call our committee to order today. We have with us committee members Warsami, Schrader, Jenkins, and Reich. We are a quorum of the committee, and we have 5 items today, 1 consent item and 4 discussion items. Our consent item is an amendment to the state legislative agenda and policy positions, inserting a statement specifically around the Department of Transportation's request for $13 million necessary for the rehabilitation and preservation of the Stone Arch Bridge. This is an iconic landmark and destination for Minnesotans and visitors alike. Certainly a project that we support as well. I want to recognize that we are joined in the chambers today by Council Member Fletcher, who has been a strong proponent of this. It's in his ward and certainly been an important issue that he's been happy to advocate for. And I don't know if you wanted to join the committee or say any words or anything like that, but otherwise, if not, we'll go ahead and see if there's any discussion on this item for consent. Move this item. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, not seeing any, so the motion carries. Thank you. We'll jump right on into our discussions. We've got some great overviews today as our new council gets going. Great overviews of our different partners across the state and also of the work of the IGR committee. So we will start there. Bergman, we are looking forward to the presentation. Welcome.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Sasha Bergman with the city's Intergovernmental Relations Department. Today, we're just going to give you kind of a brief presentation about the work of the IGR department, what we do, and then talk at sort of a high level about our 2018 legislative agenda items. If there are any questions here or offline, we're happy to discuss them. But because I know you have other presentations after this, we want to make sure to be respectful of your time today. So IGR staff serve the city of Minneapolis by advocating before other governmental bodies on behalf of the city. We help to advise on public policy related to other levels of government. We coordinate and manage intergovernmental relationships and funding opportunities, grants from the federal government, things of that nature. We provide assistance to city departments about grants management and resources, and solve problems or try to solve problems and help to overcome challenges that arise in relation to other levels of government. This slide is just to demonstrate sort of the web of relationships that exist within government, from the federal government to the state level and other local units of government. It can be complex at times, and that is part of why we're here to help navigate that relationship. The scope of our work really at the different levels of government, at the federal level, is a lot of monitoring and advocacy on behalf of the city and grants management and consulting. And I'm joined by a number of my colleagues who would be happy to answer any questions that you have that work on grants, advocacy at regional levels of government, and then of course at the state. At the state level, monitoring and advocacy of the state legislature in communication with the governor's office and the administration, as well as grants and funding opportunities that come up at the state level. In terms of regionally facing relationships, Lauren Olson on our staff does monitoring and advocacy at the Metropolitan Council and the Metropolitan Airports Commission. And then in the other category would be we represent the city at the policy committees, for example, of the League of Minnesota Cities and Metro Cities, and other coalitions that exist in different areas, whether it's public safety or housing. And then providing assistance internally, including but not limited to policy analysis, research, things of that nature. So it's kind of the scope of our work at a very high level. So the work that we do is guided by 4 documents, or at least the policies that we advocate on behalf of for the city. First, the Met Council policies, which is a document that was just developed, I think, within the last year to help guide those efforts. We have a federal agenda with federal policies. We have a state legislative agenda and a state legislative policy position document, which the policy positions is sort of a library of things to help us react on behalf of the city as things come up. And then the legislative agenda is a more focused document to help sort of set the priorities for every legislative session. And so some of those items will be likely on every legislative agenda every year, but some of them shift depending on what's happening at the legislature. The ways that we develop those policies that I just talked about, which are adopted by the council, is through an interdepartmental policy liaison team, which is an interdepartmental team made up of staff from across the city enterprise who help to bring forward ideas and help vet them and then make recommendations to the IGR committee of new proposals that could be considered for the following legislative session. From, of course, our elected officials, mayor and council members have ideas and that come up throughout the year, and those can help to add to our policy documents. Our membership and partnership organizations with the League and Metro Cities, for example, sometimes we hear of things that come up in other cities that we then investigate for our own city and may develop a policy in our documents to work on at the legislature. And then unresolved issues, things always sort of pop up that weren't on our radar and end up becoming a policy in our documents. So if there are no questions about kind of what we do and what informs our work, we'll talk just briefly about the 2018 legislative session, which is set to begin very soon on February 20th. Some of the key themes, and there's always other issues that kind of sleeper issues that pop up that we're not aware of, but we do anticipate federal tax conformity will be a very big issue that the legislature is facing. As you know, the federal government passed a tax reform bill in December, and the state's income tax system is based largely on that. And so to the extent that they totally changed a number of provisions in the federal tax code, this is going to be a big issue for the state. Bonding, it's a bonding year in theory, and in fact, seems like every year is a bonding year, at least the last few years, but traditionally, even numbered years are bonding years, and so we anticipate a lot of work probably will occur in that area. It's an election year for the governor's office and for the whole House of Representatives, and so, you know, that will be something that's down the pike that folks are thinking about, but it also means that there will be a number of our Minneapolis delegation members who will have already announced that they're not seeking re-election, so we will see some change in our delegation next session, or excuse me, the 2019 session in the upcoming election. And then finally, litigation. I'm sure you probably are aware of the litigation between the governor and the legislature last year around the line item veto of the legislature's funding. More recently, when Senator Franken resigned from his seat in the U.S. Senate and the lieutenant governor of the state, Tina Smith, was appointed to fill his seat, that vacancy in the lieutenant governor's office resulted in the ascendancy of the Senate president to that office, who is Michelle Fishbach from Paynesville, Minnesota. She, I think, would like to be in both positions or would like to keep her Senate seat, and I think there's some questions as to whether or not she's able to do that. So there is a lawsuit going on right now to try to resolve that issue. So these are some of the things that will be feeding into, excuse me, the upcoming legislative session. Just going to take a high-level overview of our legislative agenda and not go into detail on all of the items unless there are questions, and then I'm more than happy to do so, or my colleagues would also be happy to answer questions. At one of the top item listed on our legislative agenda is about advancing racial equity. And I think, you know, this statement entered our agenda and policy positions within the last couple of years, really with the understanding that it's not just in one area or another, whether jobs or public safety or housing, that we should be focusing on certain things, but it's with the whole lens of racial equity and approaching all of the different policies that we work on through that lens. So that's what our statement on racial equity in our legislative agenda is representing there. In the area of local government finance, we do anticipate to continue to work on protecting local government aid and hopefully seeing an increase in the appropriation. That's certainly something that is on our agenda. In the area of our lodging tax, the city's local lodging tax has a strange provision in law that limits the total tax burden on lodging to 13%, and if it exceeds that in the city, our lodging tax gets reduced. So we would like to seek a remedy for that issue. And then, of course, supporting direct property tax relief for homeowners and renters through the property or the circuit breaker and renter's credit. In the area of tax increment financing, there is a clarification that we would like to see, and we've been working closely with the League and Metro Cities as it relates to the limits on TIF pooling. We also will be working on a special legislation for the Upper Harbor Terminal in North Minneapolis, and that would be in conjunction with our bonding request. And then supporting viability of long-term or of pension liabilities and making sure that they don't overburden local governments. I think all of you are probably aware of our bonding requests this year. Upper Harbor Terminal is our top priority at $15 million. And then we've got emergency operations and training facility, Central City storm tunnels, Upper St. Anthony Falls Lock and Dam redevelopment, and the family partnership. In the area of transportation, this is an area where the statements that we've had haven't changed that much. There hasn't been sort of the comprehensive transportation bill that has passed at the legislature. So these just really speak to, funding for multimodal transportation needs and then providing cities with resources to address our city streets. In the area of public safety and criminal justice, we have policies that support building trust between police and community, legislation and policies that would reduce collateral consequences for low-level driving offenses, and making the driver diversion program statewide and permanent. In the area of municipal and regional governance, just to have a strong statement in support of local control. As I think many of you know, last legislative session there were a number of bills that were introduced to undermine local decision-making authority, and so seeking to preserve that is one of our key priorities for the session. And then supporting a strong and effective Met Council for regional planning. In affordable housing and homelessness prevention, supporting housing infrastructure bonds and GO bonds for public housing rehab, and then ongoing and sustainable state funding for affordable housing across the state and in the city, of course. In the area of public health, just making sure that we're preserving resources that our health department relies on. We're one of the only cities that has a community health board and a health department in the state, and so there are some resources that our health department relies on for their functions on a daily basis. And then supporting increased funding for youth employment programs. And with that, I will conclude. And if you have any questions about any of those things, we are all happy to answer any questions you have.
Excellent. Thank you. I have a question. But first, I wanted to know that we've been joined by Council President Bender and see if any of our committee members have any questions. My question for you was on advancing racial equity being at the top of our list. Are we gaining traction among legislators with that? How much does that resonate with them, especially for legislators that represent communities where this might not be a pressing issue within their community?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think there are, this is an issue across the state in different pockets of the state, and so I think there is some common ground that could be found there. In the last couple of years, I don't think in this last legislative session, but in the last couple of years, there have been subcommittees and committees sort of focused on racial equity and advancing that. So that's something that we would continue to work on and seek partners at the legislature to work on initiatives that come forward.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Not seeing any. Thank you for the presentation.
Great.
We'll now move on to League of Minnesota Cities presentation, and we're joined today by Gary Carlson, that organization's director. Welcome.
Thank you, council members. Thank you, Chair. My name is Gary Carlson. I work with the League of Minnesota Cities, as you've already indicated. I wanted to also mention that I started my career on the M floor here in Minneapolis. Back in 1983, I worked in the government relations staff with the city of Minneapolis. So I think Mayor Frazier was the mayor at the time, and I don't remember who the chair of this committee was, but I used to spend a lot of time on the mezzanine level floor of this building for a couple of years in my past. And since then, I've worked in the law firm of Briggs & Morgan, and then I've been with the League of Minnesota Cities now for almost 27 years. So I've been working on city issues for the vast majority of my career. Let me tell you a little bit about the League of Minnesota Cities. We are an organization that was formed in 1913, so we just celebrated our 100th anniversary in 2013, and we started as an adjunct to the University of Minnesota, but we started as an initiative by a lot of city officials to try to more professionalize the operations of cities throughout the state of Minnesota. So we've been around for a lot of years. I've been around for about a quarter of that time. It's hard to believe that, but we do have 833 member cities in the state of Minnesota. There are 853 cities in the state, And those 20 cities that are not members are all very, very small communities. And if they give us a call, ask us a question, want to use our parking lot to go to the Capitol, we always invite them to come down to St. Paul. So essentially, we feel like we do really represent every city in the state of Minnesota in one shape or another. You're our largest member city, over 400,000 people. Our smallest member city is the exact same size as your city council. The city of Barrie, Minnesota, which is located in the Notch, if you're on the western edge of the state, has 13 citizens in that state, or in that city. And so your council is the same size as that whole city's population, but they are an incorporated city, and they have many of the same interests that the city of Minneapolis has when it comes to running their city, although on a much smaller scale. So just to give you an idea of how our membership varies quite dramatically. We're governed by a board of directors that includes 17 officials from cities around the state that are elected by our membership. Just this last month, Council Member Ellison joined our board of directors. He took over for Council Member Glidden, who was on our board for several years. St. Paul also has a designated seat as well, as does the next organization, Metro Cities, has a designated seat as well on that board. The rest of the officials are from cities ranging from Rochester to Ely, Minnesota. We have members from all over. Our current president is the mayor of the city of White Bear Lake, Joe Emerson, and she's been on our board for a number of years as well. But that's really the governance structure, and they meet once a month and they give us direction on legislative issues and other things that we work on at the League. A little bit more about the League. We do have a lobbying arm. That's what I do. That's what my department does. But we do a lot of things in addition to representing cities at the Capitol. One of the things that we do regularly is we hold conference and training events for city officials. Just this last month, we had our newly elected official conference where we basically allow city officials to meet with longtime council members and legal staff to really understand all of the role and responsibility of being a council member. As many of you are brand new to serving on the council, you know that the state of Minnesota has very complex laws like the open meeting law, the data practice laws. All these things are state laws that you have to abide by as you run your city. And we spend time at that newly elected conference basically imparting the wisdom of senior city officials to those that attend that conference. We also do an annual conference, and this year I think we're in St. Cloud. Is that right? Yeah, we're up in St. Cloud this year. We try to hold that in Duluth, St. Cloud, Minneapolis, and Rochester. That annual conference usually involves 500 to 600 city officials that get together. And we have various breakout training sessions that try to cover issues of concern or emerging issues that cities are facing throughout the state of Minnesota. In addition to conference and training, we have a communications arm that basically puts together social media posts about events at the Capitol and other things going on in the city community. We have a weekly bulletin that covers legislative events that are occurring that my staff work on, and then we have a monthly a monthly magazine that we put out that really it tries to look at issues from a broader, longer-term perspective, looks at emerging issues that are confronting cities. So you can get copies of those reports as well, and if you want to get on our mailing list, I can certainly help you do that. We have a human resource department that gives advice to cities about various human resource issues. Human resource law is very complex, and hiring, firing, employing people takes a lot of energy and time, and our human resource department will help cities puzzle through any human resource related issues that they have. We have a group of city attorneys that really basically respond day in, day out to questions from cities across the state. How do we draft an ordinance? How do we have do you have a model ordinance that we can adopt or use as a template as our city council considers a new ordinance? We have the biggest part of what we do, this is kind of a surprise to many people, is we are an insurance business. And back in the late 1970s, right around 1980, cities were very, very bad risks for insurers. They didn't want to insure us. We had lots of claims against us. State law was such that it was very easy to sue a city. And out of the challenges that our cities faced in even getting insurance coverage, they decided to form an insurance business, basically, under the League of Minnesota Cities umbrella. Since then, I think almost every state in the country has a city insurance trust operation that provides insurance coverages for their members. We work on workers' compensation insurance and property casualty insurance. We don't do medical insurance anymore, but we do provide those and tailor those insurance coverages to cities themselves. And most every city is a member of that. Now, Minneapolis is largely self-insured because of your size, so you don't really take advantage of those services. But we do a lot in the insurance business related to workers' compensation and property casualty. Just mentioning a few other things before I talk about what my department does. One of the things that we do is we get very involved in appellate legal or appellate litigation in the state of Minnesota. Whenever a lawsuit arises or gets up to the appellate level or the state Supreme Court level, we have a part of our board of directors that evaluates those lawsuits and decides when we should get involved to help defend cities. I think one of the most recent cases that was involving Minneapolis that we got involved with was surrounding the issue of whether you had to take your minimum wage ordinance to the voters, to the ballot. And we supported the city in saying that it wasn't necessary under state law. So we do get involved in a lot of lawsuits that way. We have one attorney that works basically full-time in helping defend cities as some of those lawsuits get up to the appellate level in the Minnesota court system. Then a little bit about well, let me mention, I think we've handed out to you a copy of our annual report, and this just highlights some of the initiatives that the League of Minnesota Cities undertook this last year, everything from a race equity project, lots of work on technology services. Ann Finn is joining me today. She'll talk more about the whole plethora of legislation dealing with or affecting local control that we got involved, and we really appreciate all of the work the city of Minneapolis did to help us on trying to combat some of that legislation. So you can look at that at your leisure. But let me mention to you a little bit more about what I do and what my staff does. We basically work with your IGR staff, we work with St. Paul and all of our cities to formulate legislative policies each summer. City officials gather. We have about 175 city officials that volunteer, serve on our committees, discuss issues, formulate policy positions that are ultimately adopted by our board of directors, and that gives us our marching orders at the state capitol. The issues we cover, you saw how many issues your staff cover. We cover those issues with them as well on a broad basis, but we also get involved in a whole breadth of issues that probably no other local government in and of itself would want to get involved in. Everything from economic development to zoning to annexation to tax policy issues, human resource related issues, labor management issues, transportation. I could go on, housing. So our booklet that defines our policy positions is ridiculously complex. It does cover all of the issues we work on. It has discussions of those issues. We can certainly make copies of that available to you. It's good bedtime reading if you're kind of tired and want to fall asleep. But it really is it's a good Bible for issues confronting cities. It discusses the issue, and then it gives us direction on how to respond at the state capitol. I did give you a copy of the government relations staff listing, and this also talks about the 7 members of my department that work on your behalf at the state capitol and the issues that they cover. And you can see the breadth of those issues there. I won't get into that much more. But with that, I guess I would first ask if there are any questions I could answer as I tee up what the league is. And then I'd like to turn it over to Ann Finn. So are there any, Mr. Chair, are there any questions I could try to answer right now?
Any questions from committee members? Not seeing any.
Okay. Well, let me turn it over to Ann Finn. And without getting into too many details about the breadth of issues we cover, there's one issue that we noticed as a trend this last legislative session, and that is this whole breadth of legislation introduced that would preempt our ability.
Who's Ann Finn? You?
I'm going to let her up here just a second. Sorry.
Excuse me, sir.
And so I would like to turn it over to Ms. Finn, sorry about that, to talk more about the work we did this last legislative session that we know will continue in the 2018 session.
All right, that sounds good. Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Finn.
Mr. Chair and members, thank you so much for having us today. Before I get going, I wanted to just offer that we really enjoy working with your team at the Capitol. They make a really big difference in the work that we do for all of our cities, and they represent you really well. So hats off to them, and we look forward to working with them again in this upcoming legislative session. I want to spend, as Gary mentioned, a little time on a statewide issue. And the reason for this is it helps illustrate the relationship between the league lobbyists and the IGR folks at Minneapolis. But it also illustrates how cities statewide can make a really big difference when they work together at the Capitol on an issue. And that issue, as Gary mentioned, is local control. In the book that you saw earlier that Mr. Carlson showed you, the very first policy in this book is local control. And that's kind of what we take over to the Capitol every day is when we react to bills, we think about how it would impact your local decision-making authority at the local level. This past session in 2017, we saw a very robust agenda at the Capitol of bills that were aimed at taking away local decision-making authority. We actually, working with your staff, compiled a list of more than 30 bills that were introduced that did everything from regulating your ability to implement employment ordinances, but also going as far as requiring reverse referendums for things, taking away the authority to implement franchise fees. You'll note that many of these did not pass. There were very few that actually became law last session, and that was, I believe, the direct result of all of us working together over at the Capitol. We met with your staff and other city lobbyists on a very regular basis throughout the session to come up with strategies to combat these bills. And one of the things we did that I think was particularly helpful was we asked our cities statewide to pass resolutions demanding that the legislature not pass legislation that would take local decision-making authority away. We had almost 100 cities pass resolutions, and there are probably some cities that you've never heard of. In addition to Minneapolis, we had cities like Climax and Curry and Deer River, who had city officials that were absolutely incensed at the volume of bills. And I think that really got the attention of legislators. It came up in town hall meetings. It was a subject of conversation when they ran into their legislators both back in the district and when they came to their day on the Capitol, a day on the Hill. So I just wanted to share that with you, and as I guess in conclusion, would ask for you to remain vigilant on that issue with us because it is important to our city statewide, and we think that having you all at the table and talking with your local legislators is very helpful. Having your staff working on these issues is imperative. And we hope that we can hold back more of these bills that are sure to be introduced when the legislature reconvenes in 2018. So I will stop there.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, and we look forward to working with you.
Great, thank you. Any questions from committee members? Not seeing any. I'll just make a quick comment that I have really appreciated the resources and briefings that the League of Minnesota Cities provides. Sometimes when I'm looking for an issue and I'm just Googling on it, your guides and briefings pop up, and it's very helpful and detailed, yet also succinct and easy to digest for policymakers. So it's greatly appreciated, the resources you put out. I neglected on our last item to move receiving and filing, and normally we do that after these presentations. So I'll do that for the previous item and this item as well. So Council President Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to underscore your comments and just note how important our relationship with the League of Minnesota Cities has been. We've had a lot of turnover in our council for the last couple of terms, and so I know we have appointed new council members to both the League and to the Metro Cities boards, but we're confident that Councilmember Ellison and Councilmember Fletcher, who will be on the Metro Cities board, will represent the city well and carry on the great work that Councilmember Glidden and myself did on those bodies. And, you know, you do a lot of balancing when you're advocating for communities as large and complex as ours, along with folks from all over the state. And we just really appreciate how much you do to find those commonalities and synergies, and how well you work with our staff to just, you know, do some really important things that the city of Minneapolis benefits a lot from. And we look forward to continuing our relationship.
Great comments. Thank you. Anyone else? Not seeing any others. So on that motion to receive and file both, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, that motion carries. We'll go ahead to our Metro Cities presentation with Patricia Nauman.
Mr. Chair and members, thank you very much for the opportunity to present some information to you today about Metro Cities. Metro Cities is also formerly known as the Association of Metropolitan Municipalities. That's still our legal name, or AMM, but a few years ago we did a branding change, so we go by Metro Cities because it's easier to say, and it doesn't get lost in the sea of acronyms at the state legislature. So just to give you some very brief information about the organization, Metro Cities does represent the shared interests of cities in the metropolitan area at the legislature, executive branch, and Metropolitan Council, and I'll get more into that in a minute. We are governed by a 19-member board of directors, and I do want to thank Councilmember Bender for her service on the board, and to welcome Councilmember Fletcher, who will join the board, and to certainly thank Melissa Lesh, who also is a Metro Cities board member. The city, because of its size, has 2 seats as opposed to 1 for most other cities, with the exception of St. Paul, on the Metro Cities board. We are a 4-person staff. 3 of us do government relations work, so we're a very small team, but we like to consider ourselves an extension of your staff in terms of the work that we do at the state capitol and the Metropolitan Council. The organization has 91 members currently. It's a member-based organization. Membership is voluntary. We have 91 member cities in the 7-county metropolitan area, and that includes the core cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, as well as inner-ring suburbs, developing suburbs, small cities, large cities, medium-sized, sort of all over the map in terms of the metro area. So it's a very large and diverse membership. Again, the organization does represent the shared interests, so it is about finding those commonalities and then bringing forth those policies to our work at the Capitol and the Metropolitan Council. And I just want to say again a word of about the Metropolitan Council and our work there. The Metro Cities organization is unique in the local government advocacy community in that we are the region-wide entity for cities representing cities at the Metropolitan Council. And basically how we characterize that is we are the watchdog for cities at the Met Council. So that means we have an entire slate of policies that relate to, the funding and policy making of the Metropolitan Council. Metro Cities does take a metro-centric view of the world. Our vision is for a strong and vibrant region made up of strong and successful communities, and the organization's philosophy is essentially that in order to have a strong and vibrant region, you need successful communities. When we're working at the state capitol, that means that we are lobbying, of course, on issues that have statewide impact, but we are looking for that metropolitan impact on, impacts of state level policymaking on cities in the metropolitan area. And that can run the gamut from issues like transportation to local government aid, certainly issues like fiscal disparities, resources for anything, economic development and housing, and so on and so forth. Similar to the League, we have a policymaking process that occurs during the legislative, or the interim, when we're between legislative sessions, and it is our member cities that come together to recommend, vet, and develop those policies, and then those policies are forwarded to the board of directors, approved by the board, and then forwarded to our full membership where they are approved in November of each year. And currently, I think we have about 75 plus policies, everything again running from transportation to economic development to taxes and revenues, housing, et cetera, and certainly a whole section relating to the work of the Metropolitan Council. A strong thread that runs through Metro Cities policies, similar to what Ms. Finn mentioned, is the notion that sort of appropriate local control. That if you were to read through our policies, I'm not asking you to do that right now, of course, but if you were to read through all the policies, the thread there, the common theme is certainly about maintaining that local control and authority, making sure there's a strong state and local partnership, and making sure that there are adequate resources for cities to do the jobs that they are tasked with doing. In addition to, certainly, we're a government relations lobbying organization. The primary means of communication with our members is through a regular newsletter. We also provide legislative action alerts. We do emails, come out and see you personally. And we do encourage you, as well as other city officials, to participate in the work of the organization, and largely that is done really directly through our policymaking process. In addition, Metro Cities has the statutory authority to make appointments to the Metropolitan Council's Transportation Advisory Board and Technical Advisory Committee to the TAB, as well as the Metro GIS Board, and those are statutory authorities. I just want to maybe close or maybe just add a couple of pieces. This year, we look forward to working with your team, and I'll echo what Ms. Finn said, that we rely on your team. We work very well with them. They are very important partners for our work, and we hope that the same is true. We work very closely together. There are many legislative issues that we'll work jointly on. Those include items like local government aid, certainly funding for housing. Metro Cities will also be seeking bonding monies for cities in the metropolitan area to deal with local sewer infrastructure issues, and many other items. Certainly the local control and authority, those bills are very key and front and center for us as well. And we are anticipating more of those bills to come forward this year. I just finally want to encourage you to read the information and certainly to contact us if we can ever be helpful to you on any issue. We are here to serve as a resource for you, and thank you very much for your membership in the organization. Happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Committee members, do we have any questions? Not seeing any. Well, we appreciate all of your work advocating on behalf of the Metro region. Thank you. I will go ahead and move that we receive and file this presentation. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, that motion carries. And finally, we just have a quick federal, state, and local update. Please, Mr. Ranieri.
Mr. Chairman and members, I'm Gene Ranieri from the IGR Department. We just heard recently that the Senate, the United States Senate leadership has agreed to a deal for a 2-year budget. It increases funding for defense and increases also funding for domestic programs. The details are to come. It also has no resolution to the debt limit, so that would have to be done again, or it could be added on the floor of the Senate. It does not include any immigration or DACA solution. This bill, however, the Senate is supposed to start next week on their discussion of immigration and DACA. The House Speaker just announced that he would be starting a discussion on immigration and DACA maybe next week also. So we're not sure if the House will buy this deal because it does increase funding, and there are some folks in the House who don't like spending. So we will need to stay tuned. The Senate will try to start discussion on this legislation probably within the next day or two. But they're trying to avoid a shutdown, so to get something passed, they have to do it by tomorrow.
All right. Thank you.
Mr.
Any
Chairman, I'll
questions?
stand for any questions.
Any questions from committee members? Not seeing any. Thank you, Mr. Ranieri. So I'll go ahead and move that we receive and file that report. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, that carries. With that, we've concluded our committee's business. So this committee meeting is adjourned. Thank you.